Hi everyone, and welcome to the next hands-on activity, which is going to be focused on handling user creation or registration and authentication in Django. Now, of course, I will be sure to chapter this video accordingly, so for those of you with some experience, you're more than welcome to skip ahead to the relevant section. And for those of you that just want to watch from scratch or just want to follow along, you're more than welcome to do so. You can just follow as I do. Another thing that I want to mention is when I start and set up a Django project, I follow a particular way of doing it, a particular routine. Now, if there's something that you prefer, so something else that you prefer, your own style to doing so, feel free to go ahead and choose whichever method you feel most comfortable with, okay? So you can decide how you can go ahead and set things up. But what I like to do is I usually just create a folder on my desktop. So I'm going to say new folder. Call it dev. Okay, this is where I like to house all my Django projects. Then the next thing that I do is I head on over to the search bar and look for the CMD, so the command prompt. Okay, it will usually say my name there as a user, and I just want to resize this. Now you can also use the Visual Studio Code terminal. The reason I use the CMD is just because of habit, and I just feel it's a bit easier to just minimize and maximize. So here we are. So let's clear this up. Okay, so now that I'm in my command prompt, I want to head on over to my dev directory. So I'm just going to say cd desktop, and now I'm on the desktop. Then I can say cd dev. So for those wondering what cd stands for, it means change directory. So I'm moving to another location, so to another folder. So now I'm going to say cd dev. And now I'm in my dev directory, and we can clear this up. So now I'm in dev, and we can go ahead and proceed. Now the next thing that we should do is install the virtual env package. So I'm going to say pip install virtual env, and this is going to allow us to create virtual environments. Now this is one of the few cases in which we will install a package globally on our system. As best practice, you don't want to install packages globally in your system. You want to create a virtual environment, but in our case we have no choice. We have to install the virtual env package globally before we can start creating a virtual environment. So now what we can do is we can just say virtual env, venv. Now the venv here is the name that you assign your virtual environment. So I'm calling it venv. You can call it env, or you can give it any name here. So this part is customizable. The command is virtual env. This needs to be used, and this is the name that's custom to be your virtual environment folder. And you can press enter. Okay, so that's going to take a moment. Okay, there we go, quicker than I saw. Now you want to activate your virtual environment, so let's clear this up. So CLS just clears the screen for us to reduce all that clutter. So I'm going to say venv /scripts /activate, and that's going to activate the virtual environment. And here we can see it's activated within parentheses, so whichever name you assigned your virtual environment is now going to be shown here on the left side, okay, with parentheses on the left and the right. Now, if you want to deactivate it, you can run the same command, but instead of activate, you can just say deactivate. And you'll see now that that parentheses is gone. So now you are on your global system. So whenever you are running your project and whenever you're installing packages, most importantly, you want to make sure that you run the following script and that you're within your virtual environment as follows. So it's best to just keep this on, rather, it's the best practice. So now that we are in this virtual environment, we can install Django. So now we can say pip install Django. Okay, so let's just install that. Okay, so that's going to take a moment. So what I'll do is I'll pause the video, and once that's been completed, we can continue with the process. All right, so welcome back. So now we can see Django's been installed and we are good to go. All right, so now we're in our dev directory. So if I were to minimize this and open up my dev folder, I can now see that I have a virtual environment folder here sitting here and ready to go. Now we can create our Django project. So what we can do is head on over to the command prompt. And here I'm going to say Django-admin start project. And now you want to give your project a name. I'm just going to call it Elevate as an example. You can name it anything that you wish. And we can just set that up. There we go. So we've created our project Elevate. Now we can just say cd elevate. And now we are within our Django project. And just for continuity, you can open up your folder and you can now see that our Django project has been created and we are now currently within that now. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and utilize a text editor. or an IDE for that example. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. So I will be sure to attach a link in the description below where you can install Visual Studio Code. You can use anything that you prefer, so any sort of text editor would work. Okay, this is just a suggestion. And sometimes the folder doesn't automatically show up here. So what you can do is you can say File, Open Folder, and you can go to your desktop, wherever your directory is. So mine is dev here on the directory, and select that folder, and it's going to open up. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in here so we can actually see. Okay, there we go. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we just want to look into our folder. So we have our Elevate folder, we have our manage.py file, we have our settings.py file, we have all of the basics here. All right, so we've got that set. Now, of course, this isn't a beginner tutorial on Django, so I do have other content on the channel on that where I go into deeper I'll give you a better understanding in those videos, okay, where I explore the fundamentals of Django. Okay, but just make sure you've got everything set here and ready to go. So you have your Django project and you have your virtual environment folder. Okay, great. So what we can do now is we want to just run Python manage.py run server. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, there we go. So we can now see we've ran our server and we need to make our migrations, and we're using the latest Django's version as of today. Now, if I open up my Django project, we can now see we have a default SQLite database. So by default, Django uses an SQLite database. And we just want to make sure everything's connected fine. So we can go to localhost. And of course, I already have that here in the URL. And there we go. We can see our Django installation has been set up correctly. So we've done everything that we needed to do in order to create a Django project. Perfect. Now, the next thing you want to do is create a Django app. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is stop my server. And before I create that Django app, what I'm going to do is just make those migrations. So I'm just going to say Python manage.py migrate. All right, there we go. Perfect. Okay, and now what we can do, since we made our migrations, we can create our Django app. So it's going to be Django-admin start app, and I'm going to give my app a name. I'm going to call it let's say, what should we call this? We can call it CRM, something very simple. So I'm going to call my app CRM. You can give it any name that you wish. Clear that up. And now that we have that set, we can head on over to our directory, and we can see here that we have CRM. Okay, so now we need to register this app in our settings.py file. So we can go to our project, settings.py. And what you want to do is you just want to scroll down until you see this list of installed apps, and you just want to add in the app that you just created. So in my case, it is CRM. So here I just want to put in CRM and add in a comma there at the end. Okay, so we've now connected that. Now it's good practice to just run your server again, just to make sure that you aren't running into any errors or whatnot. Okay, that's fine, and refresh. Okay, we're good. So make sure now that you've created a Django app and that you have set it up accordingly. All right, so what we can do now is we can go ahead and continue. So now what I want us to do is to create and connect our urls.py file and our views.py file. So essentially here in our CRM, okay, we want to set up our URLs from our app here. We don't want to set up our URLs in our main urls.py file here in our Django project. So what you can do is open up your app and right click, and you want to say new file, and we want to create a urls.py file. So you can create that here. So this urls.py file, and we can just add in some lines. Now, what I want you to do is to keep this open, and we can open up our project here, Elevate, and you want to open up this urls.py file here. So we can see that this urls.py file is from our app CRM, and this is our main urls.py file in our main Django project. And you can see we have a lot of comments here. Let's just remove this. And of course, we can see this is where the base of our URL is going to be situated, such as our admin URL and all of that. So the first thing I want us to do is just add in some logic to urls.py. So we can just copy all of this here from our main project urls.py file and paste it in here. And we're not going to have this URL. and we can just keep the pass function here for now and this URL patterns list. So you just want to add that in to your urls.py file, which is situated within CRM. You want to add that in. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to connect our urls.py file from CRM to our main Django project's urls.py file, the one where the admin is. So we just want to connect it because all the URLs we create will be in our app here, so in the app level itself. So to do that, all you need to do is go to Elevate, and here you want to say comma include. So we need to use the include function to do this, and here we can just say pass, open the parentheses, and the route we're just going to leave on the default. And here we want to say include, so we're telling the main Django urls.py file to include all of the files, all the URLs that are set in the links app. So here we have, the CRM app. So CRM dot URLs. So we're telling Django to include all of that. So you just need to add in a comma at the end. So now we'll be able to create our URLs in this file here without any issues or problems. Okay, so we've got that set up and ready to go. So once you've done that, we can close this file for good. And now we just want to go ahead and create simple URLs and views. So now what we can do is we can just open this views.py file and put it here to the right. And you want to be using the urls.py file from CRM as well. Great. So now what we can do is just go ahead and set everything up. So we're going to create a few views here. So let's get started with that. So first we're going to have a home page. Then we want to have a page for our users to register, a page for our users to log in, and also a page for users to visit once they've logged in, like a dashboard page. So I'm going to say def home page. We're going to pass in the request object. And for now, we're just going to use the pass keyword. Okay, so this pass keyword here is going to allow us to have a view and not have any logical functionality in it. So it's a very useful keyword to use if you just want to essentially go ahead and ensure that you have views in place, but you don't have any errors when you are trying to run your Django application. Next, we want to have a register view. So I'm going to so remember, these are functions that we're setting for our views. Then we need to pass in the request object, and we're just going to say pass for now. Of course, next we want our users to be able to log in. So I'm going to say def my_login is the function name, pass in the request. So this request object is going to help us if we want to render our HTML templates or if we want to return a HTTP response. So it's very important to have this request object in place. Okay, so just add in some space. And then we need one more view here, which I'm going to set as def. And we can call this dashboard. And we can pass in the request object there. Okay, so we have our 4 views. So make sure you've created these 4 views. So a home page view, a register view, my login view, and a dashboard view. Great, we can go to urls.py, and now we can just set them up accordingly. So we need to use the pass function, which we are importing here. And each pass function essentially on this line here is going to represent a URL of sorts. So first we need to put in the route name. So I'm going to leave this blank because that's going to be the home page. Then I need to import that view. So in order to do that, what we need to do is to import this views.py file that we have here. We need to just below pass, we can say from dot, and we want to say import. No, that's not it. So we need to go ahead and refer to it as dot import views. Yeah, there we go. Excuse me there. Okay, so we've got views now, and of course it's going to be a home page. Okay, so we've got that set. And what you can also do now is if you want to refer to it by the name attribute, you can just put in name, and I always like to keep it at double quotes. So that is one URL that's going to be set to our home page. Now we need to create 3 more, so it's going to be the same thing here. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to set it to register, my login, and dashboard. So I'm just going to set this up here. So register, and we can keep the route name here as register. So this is how we can refer to it in our URL. And then the name. Okay, so the name parameter that we're using here is very helpful if we have links and we just want to switch over to it by links. And these links we can set in our templates. Okay, then we have my login. And we can switch that to the view, which was my_login. So that is what we set right here. Okay, and we can just say my login. So the name parameter value, I always keep the same as the route name. This is just a preference. You can decide how you want to do it. And the last one is dashboard. Okay, you can see dashboard. There we go. All right, so what we want to do now is we're going to keep it really simple. We just want to return a basic HTTP response here for the home page, just to make sure that we've configured everything else here accordingly and in place. Right, so to make use of the HTTP response request, what we need to do is first import it from Django.http. So from the Django.http package, we want to import the function HTTP response. Okay, so now what we can do is in the home page here, we can just go ahead and set this up accordingly. So we can return a HTTP response. So we're going to say return HTTP response. And here within quotes, we can just say this is the home page as an example. That's all you want to do. Then you want to go to your server. You can just press Control+C, okay, and then you want to run python manage.py run server. Now I do want to note here that if you had the server running the whole time while we made these changes, you're going to see a bunch of errors. That's why I say it's important to press Control+C so that you don't see them. So it's always a good practice if you're working on your views or your URLs, make sure you stop your server or else you're going to see a bunch of errors. Now this doesn't mean you have errors in your application. Okay, this is just all the changes that we are making, and sometimes the server doesn't keep up until we have finished with all of our code. Okay, so we can anyway run python manage.py run server. Now, technically speaking, we should be able to run this without any problems. There we go, and we should see this HTTP response. This is the home page on our home page, and we can see here the route will be the default route here. So technically speaking, if we go back here, this is our home page and we refresh, we can see it says this is the home page. And this is also a good indication that we've set up our URL and our views correctly. So make sure that you can see this and you're up to here so far. If you had an error of some kind, I'd recommend going through the code again. But just for clarity to help you guys, I will just pause on this screen for a moment. So here you can see we have our urls.py file. We've got our 4 URLs, so the home page, the registration page, the login page, and the dashboard page. And then in our views, as you can see here, we are going to eventually make use of the render function. But for now, we're just testing everything out from the HTTP response. And this is what we're seeing here in our view. We're returning a HTTP response to see this page right here. Then of course we have 3 other views here. So we have our register view, our login view, and our dashboard view, which correlates to the URLs here as we are importing it accordingly. Now the reason that we're just putting the dot there to import the views is because the views.py file is in the same directory as the urls.py. So you can see that in the same directory. And we can of course see we're just referencing that accordingly. Now the name parameter, like I mentioned before, is just used if in our template we want to refer to a particular route. So that's why I always set the name the same as the route name. So the first parameter that we set here is the route name. The last one of course is going to be set to the name. Okay, so that's all you need to do. Make sure you set that up. And if for some reason you didn't set up your main project URL correctly, I'll just go on back there so you can see. And all you needed to do was make use of the include function and include your app name .url. So this is going to make sure that we can actually work with and render out these URLs from our app. So my app is called CRM, and that's how I am outputting it. Now, of course, like I mentioned before, I do have a video on the basics of Django where I go into a deep focus. So that's something else that you can check out. I just want to mention that again so that you're aware. Okay, so that's that. So we can just close these up. Okay, so we can see our project directory as of this moment. So we have our app CRM, we have our project Elevate. Now, the next thing we want to do is instead of returning HTTP responses, we want to actually make use of templates. So what we can do now is head on to our app CRM, and I'm going to right click. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this templates. Okay, and what's best practice is to create another folder in your templates directory, and you should name that folder the same as your app name. This is to ensure we don't have any namespace errors. So I'm going to right click in templates and I'm going to say new folder, and I'm going to call it CRM. Okay, and in CRM here, this is where we're going to actually create those templates. So we need 4. We need a home page, we need a registration page, a dashboard page, and a login page. So I'm going to right click on CRM, say new file, and I'm going to create 4 files. So index.html, right click on CRM again, new file, and next is going to be register.html. Right click on CRM, new file, and we can call this my-login.html. Right click on CRM, and next we can have dashboard.html. Okay, so let's just add some text here to them. So let's say under index.html, I'm just going to add HTML. And I'm going to keep it very light and very simple here. So I'm going to say this is the home page. Copy that, go to register, replace that, and I'm just going to say register now. Okay, my login, let's say login here, dashboard, and just say this is my dashboard. Okay, so I've just added in some simple HTML markup. So the HTML tags here and just a simple h1 tag for a heading. So the dashboard page, so this is my dashboard, my login page, login here, my registration page, register now, and my index.html page, this is the home page. So make sure you just added in some text to your templates. So now what we can do, now that we have that, let's just see the location of it. So in CRM, templates, and in the CRM folder here that we created, the extra folder, we have dashboard.html, index.html, mylogin.html, and register.html. Now we can go to our views and we can just set that up accordingly. So let's start off with the home page here. So let's just move this here. Okay, so for the home page now, what we can do is remove this, and we can just say now return, and we're going to say render now, and now we need to pass in our request object here. And now you need to reference it very carefully. So templates automatically is going to be recognized by a Django, so you don't need to reference the templates folder. Okay, however, you do need to reference CRM and then that name of that particular HTML template. So in this example, we're just going to say CRM / index.html. Okay, and that's all you need to put in for now. So that's it. Now you can make sure that you have your server running. You can head on back, refresh the page, and now we can see we are rendering our HTML template. If you want to double check, you can always right click and say view page source, and you can see, if you zoom in here, you can see those HTML tags being rendered on the page just as extra verification. Okay, so that is, oh goodness, okay. That is how you can see it. All right, so we've got that set. Now we can just set up the templates for our register view, login view, and our dashboard view. We can just set that up. So let's go ahead and do that. So we just need to reference it exactly by the name of the HTML template. So make sure that you set it exactly as the name here. Okay, so what I can do is actually do it with you. So register, we can say return. Let's actually make this easier. Just copy that logic. And instead of index, you just want to say register. And that pertains to this here. Right, next, we have login. So we can just put in that logic here. And it's my-login. Okay, then dashboard would be the last one. So dashboard. There we go. So let's just check them. So make sure you've added in that you're rendering out your index.html file, your register.html file, mylogin.html file, and dashboard.html file. Make sure you're rendering them out. Okay, so now technically, if we go to the URLs, we can go ahead and check all these templates by going to the routes of those particular URLs. So see each of these URL paths as a URL. So this is the URL, this is the URL, this is the URL, and we can get to that URL of that path by whatever is entered in here. So here is blank, so that's the home page. Here register, here login, and here dashboard. So for example, we always put in /, and first we can just say register. And we can see it's rendering out the register page. So / register, and the route name was register. That is just how we depicted it there. Then we have my-login and dashboard. So let's do my-login. There we go. I'm log in here and let's look at dashboard. And that's working fine. So we've configured our views, our URLs, the basis of our Django application, and we've also configured our templates as well. Okay, so we've got everything set up and ready to go. So the next thing we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and set up everything in terms of our views and our forms. Okay, so let's get started with that. Right, so what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and create a model form for our user registration or creation form. So what we can do is we can open up our app here and we can right click and say new file, and we're going to create a forms.py file. Okay, so we're going to essentially go ahead and create a model form. Now, a model form essentially is something that we can create if we want to convert our Django models to a form. So like an online form that you may have seen online. So if you're filling out an online form where you enter in your first name, your last name, or in any situation, let's say for example you want to log into Facebook, or you want to log into Twitter or Instagram, there will be like a form where you need to put in your username and password. So that is a form essentially. And what we want to do is create a model form, which is where we convert our models, so our Django models. So let's say we have a Django model which consists of let's say a person, and a person is going to have a first name, they're going to have a last name, so they're going to have attributes such as first name, last name, they're going to have age, and anything unique to that particular person. So that's what we're doing here, we're creating a model form. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to import the user creation form, which is given to you by default with Django. So Django has a built-in model form that you can utilize. So what we can do is we can import it by saying from django.contrib.auth.forms. Okay, import user creation form. So this is the default user creation form that Django provides you with. In some cases you can use model forms to create your own forms as you desire, okay, but here what we're going to do is modify the existing form Django gives us to create a user. Next, what you want to do is you want to import the default user model that comes with Django. So essentially speaking, if you were to go to settings.py, you can see under installed apps we have the default auth app here from Django, and this auth app has a model, a default user model, which we're going to use, where we can add in a username, an email, a password, etc. These are all fields part of this app. So to do that, we can just say from django.contrib.auth.models import user. So we want to use the default user model. Now what we want to do is we want to create our model form, so we can just say class, and you can give your class name anything that you want, and I want to call it create user form. And within parentheses, I want us to inherit this user creation form that's given to us, and I want us to modify it a little bit. So this is essentially a base class that we're going to inherit. So I'm just going to say user creation form, and this is something that we just want to add into our parentheses. Okay, and next we need to specify our metadata. So I'm going to say class meta. Remember, spacing is important here. And now what we can do is say, where do we want to specify the metadata from? So it's going to be from the model, which is user. Then we need to specify our field. So I'm going to say fields. And the default Django user model has a lot of fields. Okay, I would recommend going ahead and reading more about that. But the ones that we want to use is going to be simple. It's just going to be username. And we want to ensure this is in a list. Then we have email. Then we have password 1 and password 2. Now, I just want to make something clear here. So we don't have 2 passwords, okay? But when you'll see when we are registering a user, is going to ask us for a password. That will be password 1. And password 2 essentially is going to be focused on re-entering password 1. So just as a verification check. So in terms of fields, we have a username field where a user will choose a username. We have an email field where a user will choose their email. And then password 1 is the password we want to choose. That's that field. And password 2 is just a field for verification in terms of verifying the password that's entered. But not to worry, this will make more sense as we get to it. So that's it in terms of our form. So you're more than welcome to just double check. So I will just move this up here. So this is what we need to set everything up accordingly. So we are going to use the default model user that Django provides with us, and we want to use these fields in user registration. Next, you want to go to your views.py file, and we can remove this HTTP response. And right at the top here, you can just simply say from.forms. And forms.py is in our CRM app here. So you can see we have forms.py. So that's why we can just say the dot, and we're going to say forms, and we want to import that class, which was create user form. So remember, this class name can be anything that you define. So I'm going to say from.forms import create user form, because that's the name that we specified right here. Great, so we've got that set. Next thing that we want to do is go to our register view, and we can add in the functionality that we require. So let's just add some space here. Okay, and let's get started. So here is our register view, and let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and set a variable. So I'm going to call this form, and we're going to assign that to the create user form that we have here. So this form is going to just be assigned, so create user form, like so. Next, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are sending a post request. So this means we're going to be sending data to our database. So I'm going to say if the request dot method equals that of a post request. We can then add in our functionality. Now, this will make more sense once we go to the register.html page. I'm going to show you why we need to add in this functionality, because we want to check if we are expecting a post request from this register.html page. If we are, okay, we can just say the form now is going to be equal to create user form. And what we want to do is, based on all the attributes that we are using in the create user form, so the username, the email, password 1 and password 2, based on all of those fields, what we want to do is we want to post it to the database. So we're going to say request.post. Next, we want to say if form.is_valid. And all we're doing here is we want to check if all of the data that has been entered in our fields, username, email, and password, are valid, and if we don't have any errors with our form right here. So what you can do now is you can just say form.save. And essentially here, form.save is the final method that you're going to add here. So this officially pushes all that data, if it's valid, to your database. And once you've done this, you can just simply return something. So I'm going to redirect. So that is a function we can add in the top here as a Django shortcut. So it's from the Django shortcuts package. You can just say redirect. Okay. And that's going to allow us to use that function. So just under form save, so everything, if everything is a success, we can say return redirect. And we can just redirect to a page. So I'm going to go to the login page, my-login. So if someone has registered for an account, they're going to go to the login page, and make sure that whatever you specified right here correlates to your route name, and of course what name you set here in place. So I'm going to set it to my login. And actually for safety, I'm going to put in double quotes here. There we go. Okay, so you can decide how you want to do that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to render out our form to this register.html file. We need to render it out. So I'm going to create a context dictionary here. And say context equals, and I'm going to set my key value pairs. So the key can be anything. That's what you reference in your HTML page. So I'm going to call the key here register. Let's say register form, and the value, okay, is going to be form. So as we can see, we stipulated form here, and that's going to be set as form. Okay. So now what we can do is we can just say add in a comma and say context is equal to context, and this is going to allow us to pass this form that we created. So this model form that we have here, we want to pass it to register.html. Now here you can either say context or context equals context. It's just a developer preference. You can decide what you want to do. But essentially this is our view. So I'll just zoom out so you can see. So this is what we need to add into place for the functionality in order to register a user. So all we need to do now is we need to just display the form here. That's why we're adding it in a context dictionary and display it on the register.html page. Okay, so we've got that set. So now what we can do is we can go to our register.html page and let's just reference it accordingly. So what you can do is just create a form, and that form is going to take in the following method, which is going to be post. So this is why we set it to post here. So when we said if request equals method equals post, we are just checking because we want to send it from the HTML here. So this is why we're doing that check. And then I like to say autocomplete equals off. I really don't like suggestions, and that's fine. And then what you want to do is you want to add in the CSRF token. This is a built-in tag because for every post request you send on Django, you need to pass a CSRF token. Then here we can reference that form here. So we called it register form as the key. So here is where you reference it, register form. And I'm going to say dot as underscore p. So this dot as underscore p is just going to add in some styling because it looks really ugly without it. So I'd recommend you add it. And then we can just put in a button here. So I'm going to say input type is a submit button. And the value is, I'm going to call it register. And that's all you need for that. So this is what we need for our form. So here, essentially, we are passing through the model form that we created, which is going to consist of the fields that we stipulated. And the fields that we stipulated, if we can see, is username, email, password 1, password 2. These are the fields that we are outputting now on our register.html file. And of course, that is based on the context dictionary that we passed on the form. And as you can see there, we assigned it accordingly to that variable, and form is essentially based on the value. And the key here is just how we reference it in the HTML. So this is just like a placeholder, you could say, for the value that we're outputting. Okay, so that's it. So now what we can do is just restart our server, and we should see everything on the page. So we can refresh, and let's go to the register page. And there we go. So here we go. We have our registration page. So we can add in a username, we can add in an email address, we can add in our password, confirmation, and register. And when we registered, it's going to redirect us, as we can see, to the login page. So what we can do is actually give this a test. So let's actually do that. So enter a username. I'm going to call this, say james@mail.com. Okay, and enter password and register. And there we go. So it takes us to the login page. So if you want some extra validation to know that our user was actually registered, you can always check it in the admin page. So that's something that we can go ahead and check as well. So what we can do is just create a super user. So we can say python manage.py create super user. I'm going to leave a default as Arno, email blank, enter in a password. Okay, and run your server. And now we can go and log into the admin page with those super user credentials to see if that user was actually created. So James it was. So you can just switch and add in the route name of admin and log in with your credentials. All right, and log in. Once you've entered in those credentials, head on to users. And here you can see, okay, we have our super user and here's James. So it took in the username James, it took in the email James@mail, and we can see that set. Now you can see we also had the opportunity to use first name and last name as a field. So when we set up our model forms here, you can see the fields that we have here. So what we could also have done is we could have also added in first name and last name as a field here as well. That's something else you can do, but we were a bit selective here. We wanted to keep it basic. So we're just setting the fields that we want based on the model of user. So this is the default user. So you can see here, we have this model here that already exists by default with Django. So the user model here. Now remember, with Django, it automatically adds in an S, so don't be swayed here. So this is the user model, and that is the user model in forms.py that we're importing. And as you can see here, we're just inheriting that default user creation form here. We're importing this here, and in our class, we're customizing that class, and we're just altering that base class that we are inheriting from Django and just customizing the fields that we want to use for registration. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we've got that set. So now what we can do is just log out, and that's it in terms of user registration. So we can head on back to the page that we are at, and now we can just go back to login. There we go. Okay, so now we want our users to log in, and let's say they logged in. We want them to then head on over once they've logged in to the dashboard. So that is the process that we want to set up. So now what we can do is we can just zoom out here. So register is done. We don't need to focus on this now, and the views we can close for now. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and create another model form, but for authentication. Now, with authentication, Django also provides a default authentication form, much like user creation. There's a default one built in, so we don't need to create a model class from scratch. We can just customize it slightly like we did here with our user form. So it's also good to just add in comments. So here I'm going to say register a user, or create a user, so we can say create or register, and we can just say here authenticate a user. Okay, or what we can do is just say model form, so we know that this is what it's for. It's not the actual view functionality. Okay, so let's start that process. So what we can do is right at the top, we want to essentially go ahead and just import the authentication form. Now you can just add in a comma here, and it's going to be exactly the same. So it's from Django contrib.auth.forms. Wait, I think I think it's the same one. So Django contrib, yeah, it is. So it's going to be from the same package essentially with Django. All you need to do is right next to it say authentication form. So right next to user creation form, you can just put in a comma and say authentication form. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and import forms. So I'm going to say from Django import forms. Now we need to utilize the forms class here because we're going to make use of a widget. So we're going to say from Django.forms.widgets import password input and text input. So in order to use these widgets, password input and text input, we need to import forms. And these widgets are essentially fields which are very unique and specific. So text input would be appropriate for entering a username, and password input, of course, for passwords. So we can create our new form here. So it's going to be very simple. So we can just say class, and I'm going to call it login form. You can call it anything you want. And then you need to inherit the base class, which is going to be authentication form. You can also copy this if you want. And you just want to paste that in here so we can override it. And now we can just set two fields. So username is going to be forms.char field. So it will be a char field. And we want to set that widget. And that widget is going to be set to text input. And you want to open and close the parentheses. Then you want to set the password, and the password is going to be set to the same forms.char field, and the widget is going to be set to password input, and you want to open and close the parentheses. So this is what you want to set up accordingly. So your username and your password is going to be forms.char field, and you want to set the widget that you've imported. So we want to use a text input and a password input. And we just want to set that up here accordingly and make sure that's set and into place. Okay, so that's what we need. The two fields we need, username and password, very simple. Great, so we've got our form set. Now we can go to our views and set up authentication. So right at the top of your views.py, you want to, of course, in the first line here, you just want to make sure that you import login form. So remember, that is the name of the class name that you specified in forms.py. So that's what we set here. So login form. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to import the auth model. So what you can do here is you can just simply say from Django.contrib.auth.models import auth. Okay. So we want to use the auth model, and then we want to make use of a few functions. We won't use all of them, but it's best that you know some of them. So we can say from django.contrib.auth import authenticate. So this is authenticate function. That's something we will use. A login function and a logout function. So some of these we don't need to use, some of them we do, but just for your notice. So authentication models and functions. So just helpful to know. All right, so we need to import that. Now we can go ahead and set up our business logic in our login view. So here's the login. Okay, and you just want to move this up. Okay, and some space. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing as before. So we can create a variable called form, and we're going to associate it to login form. Next, we want to check if the request.method is going to be that of a post request. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to set our form to login form again. And we want to say all the data that is entered within the login form. So we have two fields, username and password. So all the data that is entered in there, okay, we want to ensure that that request gets sent as a post request. So all the data gets sent as a post request. Okay. Then we want to check if the form is valid. So if the form is _ valid. So if that form is valid, what we can do is we can go ahead and we can just set the username. And I'm going to say the username is going to be request.post.get, and we want to get the username. So essentially we want to get the username here, and we also want to get the password. So next we can say password is equal to request.post.get, and we want to get the password. Okay, so once we've obtained the username and the password, we want to check this in our database. So we can just create a variable called user, and we want to use the authenticate function now, which is something we imported right here. So we want to use the authenticate function. And that authenticate function here is going to take in a request, and it wants to check if the username in our database, which is called username, is equals to the data that we entered in our field username. So we're just checking if the password is equal to the password and the username is equal to the username. So essentially we're going to check if the database username matches the username entered in our form, and if the password in the database matches the password we entered in our form. And we're going to use the authenticate function to check this. If that user exists, we can go ahead and do some functionality here. So what I'm going to do just below is say if the user is not none. So if the user exists, essentially, we want to use the auth function to allow that user to log in with a request. And if that's the case, we can redirect them, and we can redirect them to the dashboard. So all logged in users that are all authenticated users, should I rather say, will be redirected to the dashboard. So remember, this is the auth.login. We're using the auth function here, and we're going to utilize it with login, which is based on what we are importing right here. So these functions, we're using these functions in tangent. Okay, and that's essentially what we need. The next thing we need to do is create a context dictionary to output these model, our model form. So I'm going to create context dictionary. So here the key will be login form. This is what we referenced in the HTML, and the value is going to be form. Because remember, we just referenced that as form here to this variable that we created, and that's going to house all those widgets. So the fields, the username and the password field, which we want to output onto our mylogin.html page. Next, we can pass that in. So I'm going to say context equals context, or you can just leave it as context. Choice is yours. Okay, so now we can reference it in our login page. So we can go to login. And we technically have some logic in register, so we can literally copy this. So in register, we can just copy this logic. Okay, that's literally all you need. You just need to now remove this key here, because remember the key we said was login form. So I'm just going to switch that to login form. All right, there we go. So we also have the post request, which we are checking for right here as well. So just for clarity there. And we can just test if that field, if that actually works. So what we can do is head on back, refresh, And here we have a username and a password field. So we can just change the text there from register to login. There we go. And technically speaking, if we have an authenticated user, we should be redirected to the dashboard. So just make sure in your URLs that you specify dashboard here according to the name parameter and the route name as well. So let's test this out. So we should see the login page if we put in a correct password. So what I want us to do is I want us to first check a incorrect password. So I'm just going to put in something randomly. Let's put in say James, and I'm going to put in the wrong password. Okay, there we go. Please enter a correct username and password. Okay, that's good. And let's put in the real password. And there we go. We get redirected to the dashboard page. Perfect. So there we go. We've added in user authentication for logging in. All right. So the next thing, of course, which is probably on your minds, is now that we've done that, how can we actually go ahead and ensure that we're able to log out? So this is actually very simple. So we can just create a, let's say we were to head on to our view. All right, we have our dashboard page here, which is fine. But just below, we can just create another view. I'm going to call this def user logout, pass in the request. And you just want to say auth.logout. And request, and then you can return and redirect. We can redirect back to the home page if we're being logged out, and that's all you need. So you just need to use the auth function, and you want to allow them to log out. So you're going to log out of that session or that request, and you're going to be redirected to the home page. Now, what we need to do now is reference this in a URL. So in our urls.py file, you can create another URL. So we can just give it a path. It's going to be user-logout, the route name. The view was user logout underscore. Yes. And the name user logout. Okay, so you just need to set that URL as well. And the reason you need to set this URL is because we need to add this option, as you can see on the dashboard. So if we're on the dashboard, we want to be logged out. So we want to be redirected. So what's going to happen when you click that URL, you're going to be redirected to the home page here, because remember, that's what we stated in terms of the route name. So it's blank, empty strings. So now what you can do is you can head on over to your dashboard template, and you can just add something in here. So essentially, you just want to add in a link to head on to the logout page. I'm going to say a href. And this is just going to be a link, and we need to specify it as follows. So you want to add in a curly brace, percentage symbol, and we're going to say URL, and this is going to be user logout, so user-logout. So that's what we stipulated here in URLs, so the name and the route name. So we just need to set that in. And this is going to make this URL clickable. So we'll head on straight to, we're going to execute this view here. So user logout, we're going to execute this, and it's going to redirect us back to the home page. So we're just using this URL here as an entry point to execute the view to return to the home page. And then what you want to do is you just want to close this href. So we can just say logout here. And just make sure your server is running. So you can restart your server, that might be best. And we can just refresh, and there we go, we have an option to log out here. So if we click on this, according to our function, we'll be logged out and sent to the home page. There we go. So that's it. So we've now learned how to register users or create users, how to perform authentication in terms of logging in and logging out. Now there's one more thing I want to mention, and that is how you can go ahead and protect your view. So what I mean by that is, let's say we have the dashboard and we don't want unauthenticated users to view the dashboard page. So you can see here, I'm logging out here, and I'm still able to head on over to the dashboard page as an unauthenticated user. So what we can do is we can add in a login required decorator. So you can go to your views.py, and we can just bring this dashboard view up a bit. So at the top of your views.py file, okay, we can close this URLs, this dashboard, and this form. So in our views.py, right at the top, we can just say from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login underscore required. So from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. So we're going to use this login required decorator to protect our view. So make sure you've imported that. Then we want to choose or navigate to the view that you want protected. So in our case, it's going to be dashboard. So right in at the top of this function on dashboard, I want to say at login underscore required. And we need to put in the login URL. So we're going to set that login URL. And for me, it's my-login. So that is the URL for my login. And we can add that in. Make sure to refresh your server. So it's very easy. Okay, and now let's refresh. Let me go to the dashboard directly, and it's going to force me to log in first. So you can see here, it's now appending the login function on the condition that we'll only be able to go to the dashboard if we have logged in as an authenticated user. And you can see this is how we can go ahead and protect our views. Okay guys, so that's it. So that is everything in terms of the basics of handling user authentication, user registration / creation, also a little bit on how we can protect our view. Now, in a lot of the videos, I feel that the source code is not too hard to forget or to type, should I rather say, but I can admit that there is quite a bit of source code, and you can make a typo here and there in terms of a syntax error, just a mistype. So what I'm going to do is attach the source code as well. I will be sure to provide this because I know it's quite a lot of code, so I can understand. So I will be sure to attach the link to the source code in the description below. So just be sure to check that out if you want to just download the source code. But essentially, guys, that is it. And what we can also do is, as a final test, we can just do a quick demo here. So we can just head on to the register page. Okay, so let me register a user. So I'm going to say Jane. No, we can't put the same. Let's say Kate. Yeah, kate@mail.com. Register. Kate. Log out. Go to the dashboard. And there we go. So there we go, have it. There's a short demonstration there for you. And of course, if you were to head on to your super user, you'll see that we have a new user called Kate in our database. Of course, you can add in some links here as well. So if you want to redirect, I can show you that as well. So just something extra. So what you can do is on dashboard, we have a link here. So you can technically on your home page, just on index.html, put that in for register. And we can have one for login as well if you'd like. So you just at least have some basic linking structures there. Okay, and refresh. And we can go to login here and register here. All right, that looks ugly. Let me just put in a space. Double space should do it. There we go, register. Login. Okay, so that's also added in. So you at least have some sense of direction. You don't need to manually put in the route names. All right, so that's it, guys. And I hope this was helpful to you. And like I said, I will put the link to the source code in the description below so you can check that out. All right, so that's it, guys. And as always, thank you for support, and I'll see you next time. See you next time.